It turns out Meghan could no longer hide her true ambition, fighting tooth and nail to tear the child and family patronage right away from Catherine. Princess Anne stepped in fast to defend Catherine, while Prince William made it very clear there would be zero compromise. While the world watched Catherine quietly step back to focus on her medical recovery and shield her kids from the brutal spotlight, someone else saw an opening, a vacant slot. They saw a perfect strategic entry point, a chance to exploit a family's private vulnerability and claw back into the institution they claim to despise. Palace sources have now confirmed a wild chain of events that unfolded earlier this week. It reads almost like a political thriller, but it carries some pretty massive constitutional consequences. Meghan Markle tried to orchestrate a massive, high-profile return to London. Her strategy was obvious: bypass the usual palace red tape and project an image of pure global authority. Inside reports show Meghan's team made a direct request for her to land a private helicopter right on the grounds of the royal palace. The excuse was to hand-deliver a sealed document of urgent diplomatic importance straight to the sovereign. It was a classic Hollywood power move, a visual stunt designed to show she wasn't arriving as a beggar, but as a massive international figure. But the response from the king's household was fast, absolute, and completely unyielding. That request to land her chopper on palace grounds? Flatly, strictly denied. The palace completely shut down the theatrical entrance, pointing to tight security rules and the absolute need for traditional royal decorum. There would be no red carpets, no cinematic moments, and zero special treatment for a non-working royal living in California. Hitting this brick wall, Meghan and Prince Harry had to pivot fast, executing a pretty radical change in tactics. Instead of a grand aerial arrival, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex were forced to sneak onto the palace grounds in a quiet, heavily tinted vehicle, slipping through the side gates under strict privacy. They rolled up to Clarence House not as triumphant global heroes, but as people sneaking through a quiet, heavily policed back entrance. But it was what happened after their highly anticipated meeting that really caught the eye of seasoned royal watchers. When their car finally rolled back out of the palace gates, cameras caught a quick, telling glimpse of their departure. Those on the ground described Meghan's expression as pure, unmistakable fury, a look of deep frustration and simmering resentment that mirrored the historic events of 4 years ago. It was a dead ringer for the infamous 2020 Megxit negotiations, the exact moment when their push for a half-in, half-out royal status was systematically crushed by senior royals. 4 years ago, they honestly thought they could force the crown's hand using public pressure and clever media leaks. This week, they came back with the exact same game plan, expecting a fragile, recovering institution to bend to their will. But the playing field had completely changed. The monarchy they faced was no longer willing to play nice or quietly manage endless family grievances. The second that sealed document hit King Charles's desk, the family launched a coordinated, three-pronged response. For years, we've been told the royal family prefers to stay silent, suffering in dignified isolation while avoiding direct conflict at all costs. Tonight, we can officially reveal that the era of passive endurance is over. This time, King Charles, Princess Anne, and Prince William didn't hide behind vague spokespeople or polite diplomatic statements. They rose up together, speaking with absolute clarity, ferocity, and unified power to defend the Princess of Wales. They recognized this wasn't just a simple request for some charitable partnership. It was a direct, calculated challenge to the crown. Meghan's written proposal didn't just ask to help out with the covenant. It actually contained sharp, targeted criticisms aimed directly at Catherine's current ability to work. The document argued with sharp legal precision that the Queen's covenant needed an active, modern leader with huge international reach. It directly implied that Catherine's focus on her health and family made her incapable of leading the patronage into a globalized future. This blatant attempt to weaponize a woman's medical recovery against her duty is what triggered absolute fury inside the palace. Meghan's legal pitch tried to spin Catherine's doctor-ordered rest as an administrative abandonment, claiming the vital work of the covenant was just languishing in isolation. The sheer arrogance of the proposal was breathtaking, operating on the wild assumption that global fame and American media deals could easily replace a decade of quiet, deeply impactful service to the British state. The Sussexes believed that by framing their demand as a rescue mission for a struggling charity, they could set a PR trap the king couldn't escape. They figured a refusal would let them paint the palace as rigid, outdated, and cruel, while an approval would hand them the ultimate prize, a permanent, high-profile royal platform completely free of palace control. But they completely failed to anticipate the massive scale of the royal counterattack. The three pillars of the monarchy stood shoulder to shoulder. They knew that if they allowed Catherine's life work to be carved up and handed to people who abandoned their duties, the very credibility of the crown would collapse. This is the real story of how that corporate-style ambush was met with an unyielding royal shield, and it marks the absolute end of the Sussexes ever negotiating with the British crown. The structural precision of Meghan's sealed document didn't just appear out of thin air. It was a masterpiece of legal maneuvering crafted with the kind of intimate insider knowledge that immediately set off tripwires deep inside Buckingham Palace. We can now reveal this entire legal strategy depended on a highly specific and obscure administrative loophole. A loophole dragged into the light from the most restricted corners of the royal archives. The quiet architect behind this transactional plot was Sir Malcolm Avery. He was a veteran advisor who spent decades drafting the actual rules of the Queen's Covenant for children and families. In a moment of sheer professional negligence, Avery leaked the inner workings of that very covenant over drinks at St. James's Palace. He casually pointed out a dusty, forgotten rule, the temporary stewardship provision. This specific rule, designed in the mid-20th century, was an extreme emergency safety valve. Monarch name, a temporary outside administrator to run vital charities, but only if a senior royal was completely incapacitated and unable to do their job. To a hungry legal team sitting in California, this dusty detail was no footnote. It was a golden key. Meghan's lawyers immediately grabbed the phrase temporary stewardship, stripping away all its historical limits. By the time they handed the draft to King Charles III, they had quietly deleted the rule that any temporary trustee had to be a working royal living full-time in the United Kingdom. Instead, they remade the clause to pitch Meghan as the perfect globally recognized trustee who could run things while Catherine was hidden away. This was an incredibly sophisticated attempt to use royal rules to legitimize a hostile takeover of a crown asset. The papers were written with a chilling corporate coldness, framing the whole coup as a simple, modern business necessity. The moment King Charles III read this document with his private secretaries, they felt a mix of total shock and instant recognition. The king saw right through it. Those ultra-confidential references and precise legal phrasings could only come from someone who had once held the keys to the palace vaults. This wasn't a standard petition, it was an organized raid on the institution. The king knew that if this paper ever set a precedent, it meant any future sick leave or brief step back from the public eye by a working royal could instantly be weaponized by outsiders looking to seize their patronages and titles. The king instantly ordered a quiet internal hunt for the leak. That investigation ended with a grim final confrontation with Sir Malcolm Avery. The Crown's message was brutal. The palace's private archives are not business commodities to be looted and traded by people who walked away from their vows to the nation. The palace response behind closed doors was swift, calculated, and entirely without precedent. Once they saw the scale of this quiet ambush, the old royal rule of silent endurance went straight out the window. Meghan and Harry made a massive miscalculation by thinking that targeting Catherine would isolate her. Instead, it forged the senior royals into an unbreakable front. This wasn't some petty family squabble anymore, nor was it about soothing a bitter younger son. This was a direct constitutional threat to the very survival of the crown. Three powerful voices led the counterattack, building an unyielding defensive front that crushed any chance of a compromise. First, King Charles III demanded a private, highly classified face-to-face with Meghan inside Clarence House. With 0 cameras and no outside advisors in the room, the king didn't pull a single punch. He stared right at the Duchess of Sussex and delivered a quiet, devastating blow, telling her plainly that she was demanding rights that were never hers to take and was shamelessly exploiting Catherine's battle with illness for a political power grab. The king made it clear taking sick leave did not mean surrendering a role, and it would never be an open invitation for outsiders to slide in. Then came Princess Anne, speaking with her usual razor-sharp clarity during a tense, high-level meeting about the future of those patronages. She dropped a heavy warning to anyone who thought a slick public relations campaign could force the monarchy's hand. Anne warned with absolute gravity that when people refuse to change their core nature, they eventually learn the real lasting value of someone who has dedicated their whole life to duty. She made sure everyone knew the standards of the crown would never be shifted, bent, or watered down to feed the egos of people who want the spotlight without doing any of the work. Her sharp words shredded the corporate speak of Meghan's proposal, drawing a hard line between true duty and mere celebrity. But the most explosive, unforgiving reaction came straight from Prince William. Palace insiders described the Prince of Wales as being in a state of quiet, dangerous fury. He flat out refused to let his wife's vulnerable recovery be turned into a marketing battlefield for the Sussexes. William warned both his father and senior advisors that he would never tolerate a concession that threatened the very future of the crown. William argued passionately that letting the Sussexes reclaim a secure patronage would undermine the stability of 4 future reigns. He meant the direct royal line stretching from the late Queen Elizabeth II through King Charles and into his own future tenure and ultimately the reign of his son, Prince George. William insisted that this deep structural vulnerability must be permanently repaired before outside pressures could threaten the young prince. The Prince of Wales declared the family would not let those who walked away from duty cast a shadow over the working monarchy. To fully comprehend the sheer audacity of Meghan's current demands, we must first look back at the highly telling circumstances of her initial exit from working royal life. When the Duchess of Sussex decided to walk away from her official duties, she did so with a calculated coldness that left the British public and the palace completely stunned. There was no hesitation, no lingering sense of duty, and certainly no concern for the vital national institutions placed in her hands. She cast aside the sacred trust of the sovereign, abandoning the historic duties she had promised to uphold, all to chase highly lucrative commercial entertainment deals, corporate sponsorships, and massive celebrity branding initiatives across the Atlantic. To Meghan, these prestigious royal patronages seemed to be treated as temporary vanity projects, easily disposable stepping stones used for initial global positioning, then tossed aside the second they stopped serving her narrative of victimization. The record of this abandonment is clear, and it deeply damages the Sussex narrative of selfless charity. Among the biggest casualties of Meghan's exit were 2 highly prestigious institutions. Queen Elizabeth II had personally handed her as a sign of supreme royal favor the Royal National Theatre and the Association of Commonwealth Universities. And these were not minor organizations. They were pillars of British culture and education, demanding active, devoted, and steady leadership. But when the Duchess rushed off to California, she left these vital groups in a state of complete administrative limbo. She did not arrange any orderly transition plan, nor did she show any real concern for how her sudden exit would disrupt their daily operations, their crucial fundraising, or their public standing. They were left behind like unwanted baggage, exposing the massive gap between her loud public rhetoric of compassion and her actual commitment to service. In the wake of this betrayal, Buckingham Palace did not panic. Instead, the royal household initiated a highly thorough, quiet, and deeply meticulous administrative review process. The goal was not just to fill vacancies, they had to save these crucial groups from the Sussex chaos. Under the direct guidance of senior officials and the king, the palace carefully evaluated the specific operational needs and long-term goals of each organization. They resolved that these royal patronages would never again be used for personal branding. Instead, they were systematically given to active working members of the royal family who had a genuine, proven interest in these specific areas. The Royal National Theatre, for instance, was eventually placed under the stable, dedicated stewardship of Queen Camilla, while other vital educational roles were integrated into the portfolios of working royals who knew that patronage is a lifetime commitment of service, not a quick marketing campaign. This complete rejection of duty brought equally severe consequences for Prince Harry. The king made the inevitable decision to strip him of his honorary military titles and royal patronages. Deeply revered titles like Captain General of the Royal Marines, which had been held with immense pride by generations of senior royals, were taken back by the crown. These sacred military links, forged through centuries of sacrifice, could not be left with someone living in a California mansion, entirely detached from the daily life of the British Armed Forces. Even his beloved sporting roles, most notably with the Rugby Football Union and the Rugby Football League, were stripped away in a move that showed the clear contrast between abandonment and duty. These vital sporting roles were handed over to Catherine, the Princess of Wales. With her quiet grace, Catherine stepped forward to embrace these heavy roles, stabilizing the groups and proving to the British public that true royal leadership means loyalty, consistency, and showing up. This brings us to a major turning point in this entire crisis, this sudden, highly powerful intervention of Queen Camilla. To the outside world, the Queen's fierce drive to defend Catherine seemed unexpected, but to those who understood the inner court of today, it made sense. Queen Camilla has a deep, highly personal understanding of what it feels like to be targeted by these relentless, coordinated media campaigns and left completely vulnerable. She lived through decades of intense scrutiny, quiet endurance, and the hard work of rebuilding her own reputation. Seeing Meghan try to exploit Catherine's temporary medical absence, the Queen recognized the deep cruelty behind the move. Camilla saw firsthand that Meghan's legal requests were a clever public relations trap for King Charles. If the king gave in, it would humiliate Catherine publicly, making her look like she was easily replaceable. But if the king said no, Meghan's public relations machine would immediately paint the palace as cold and heartless toward a woman who just wanted to help kids. Understanding the trap, Queen Camilla stepped up behind the scenes, urging the king to take a firm, unyielding stand. She argued passionately that the royal family must never let media pressure, threats, or negative American press dictate who gets royal duties. Camilla made one thing very clear: protecting Catherine. Her healing, her dignity, and her massive service to the country was the crown's only real priority. Standing shoulder to shoulder with Prince William and Princess Anne, Queen Camilla helped build an absolute fortress around the family. Together, they shut down Meghan's trap. They kept the Princess of Wales safe from what felt like a calculated corporate raid. And they sent a sharp message straight to California. The House of Windsor stands together, protecting its own. The corporate ambush by the Sussex legal team fell completely flat, triggering a swift and devastating constitutional counterstrike from the palace. King Charles III saw right through the deceptive proposal. Realizing the depth of this administrative betrayal, he knew a quiet, private rejection wouldn't be enough to stop future power grabs. The monarchy needed a permanent, legally binding fix to seal the administrative loopholes Meghan and her team had tried to exploit. After intense, urgent talks with his sister, Princess Anne, and the keeper of the Privy Seal, the king signed off on a historic document, the newly revised Royal Charter of Patronages. This wasn't some simple press release or a passing palace memo. It was a permanent, powerful intervention meant to safeguard the crown's deepest promises for generations to come. This new charter was built specifically to block the exact legal loopholes Meghan's California lawyers had tried to use. It focused heavily on rewriting the old sensitive rules about who manages royal assets when a family member is on sick leave. The first big clause made it absolutely clear that a temporary absence for any reason, whether for health reasons or private family time, would never be treated as an empty seat or an abandonment of their royal patronages. The official charter stated with absolute legal clarity that Catherine's role as head of the Queen's Covenant for Children and Families remained active, permanent, and completely off limits to outsiders. By making this constitutional law, the king disarmed Meghan completely, stopping her from framing Catherine's recovery as some sort of institutional failure that required her own global intervention. But the charter didn't stop there. It set a second, equally heavy boundary that crushed the long-term plans of Harry and Meghan. The new rules declared that the honor of representing the crown through official patronages was strictly and exclusively reserved for active working royals who live permanently in the United Kingdom and operate under the direct authority of the crown. The document went even further, stating that anyone who has formally walked away from their royal duties or who tries to mix highly prestigious titles with private commercial brands, big media deals, or corporate fundraising is permanently banned from holding or even temporarily helping with any royal patronage. This single clause slammed the palace doors shut on the Sussexes, making sure they could never use the late Queen Elizabeth's charities to polish their own brand or gain a business foothold in London. The execution of this new charter was swift, quiet, and completely coordinated. Palace officials received immediate orders to cut off all contact with Meghan's legal and PR teams. Private secretaries for both the King and Prince William launched a global hunt to find and pull down all unauthorized marketing materials, donation drafts, and promo campaigns created by the Sussex team that used the official seal of the Queen's Covenant. They soon discovered Meghan's team had already started quiet talks with major international donors, wrongly assuming the king would cave to pressure and hand them temporary control of the prestigious charity. But the king's decisive move completely shattered those commercial plans. It forced the instant shutdown of their global corporate campaigns, exposing the massive gap between their big promises to wealthy investors and their actual non-existent standing in the United Kingdom. The fallout from this heavy legal blow was instant, and it deeply damaged the Sussexes' public image. Even though they tried desperately to hide the embarrassing details, news of the rejected helicopter landing, that tense meeting at Clarence House, and the total dismissal of their legal papers leaked to major global news outlets within hours. Stories about Meghan's desperate bid to grab Catherine's life work were playing across every major television network, radio show, and news website in the country. The public reaction was massive, a huge wave of support for Catherine, and heavy backlash against the Sussexes for their timing. People across Britain deeply respected the quiet strength and dignity of the Princess of Wales, who stayed completely silent through the drama, refusing to engage in a public mudslinging match or let vulnerable children be used as corporate chess pieces. King Charles's firm action showed the nation that the crown values quiet loyalty, duty, and real sacrifice far more than global celebrity, drawing a clear line that the family will defend at all costs. This dramatic constitutional face-off ended with absolutely zero room for negotiation or compromise. King Charles III had drawn a hard line in the sand, showing the world that the crown's promises are absolute and completely shielded from outside pressure. Catherine's quiet dignity, as she got back to work with the Queen's Covenant for Children and Families, served as a powerful, silent answer to the aggressive corporate tactics of the Sussex legal team. Meanwhile, Meghan and Harry headed back to California, their grand plans completely torn apart. The monarchy walked out of this bitter conflict with its core foundations reinforced, standing more united now than at any point in modern history. Just days after the updated Royal Charter of Patronages was officially published, public opinion across Britain hardened into a massive wave of support for the working royals. You could not find a sharper contrast between these two women. Meghan had tried a calculated, legalistic move to grab a prize royal asset while the family was vulnerable, but the plan was exposed, leaving her global reputation in absolute ruin. On the other hand, Catherine simply refused to get dragged into a public relations war. By focusing quietly on the children and families of the covenant, she won the deep, lasting respect of the entire nation. When the Princess of Wales stepped out for her first public appearance at a South London children's center, the massive cheering crowds made one thing clear: real royal authority is earned through quiet service, not cheap commercial fame. For Harry and Meghan, closing that stewardship loophole permanently killed their last hope of using their royal titles to sell a global brand. The decisive, unyielding moves by King Charles III, Prince William, and Princess Anne ensured that the sacred legacy of Queen Elizabeth II stayed protected, kept solely in the hands of those who actually serve the British crown. First came the systematic stripping of Harry's last military titles and sporting patronages, followed by cutting off Sir Malcolm Avery's access to the restricted palace archives, which finally severed the last structural ties between the Sussexes and the working monarchy. The massive corporate experiment of the Sussex brand had crashed straight into the iron wall of constitutional duty, and the crown won. As the dust settled across the historic halls of Windsor and Clarence House, the real lesson of this clash became crystal clear. The British monarchy is not a commercial business to be run by slick public relations campaigns, nor are its ancient honors for those who walk away from their vows. King Charles III had successfully defended his mother's sacred promise. Prince William had secured the dignity of 4 successive reigns, while Catherine reclaimed her rightful place at the heart of the family's charitable work. The era of passive compromise was officially over, replaced by a deep commitment to the values of loyalty, continuity, and quiet, enduring service.